Hi, I'm going to talk about time travel today and talk about 10 particular books that cover that trope and different ways it's been handled. And all these books I think are really good. I've read more than 10 books on time travel, but I've picked these 10 to talk about. Could do another one actually, because there's some others that I haven't read yet that I've bought. When I was kind of planning to do this, I've got into looking up some of these other ones that have been around. But yeah, time travel as a thing, as a trope, is quite common in films, and we're all familiar with the idea. So time travel as a concept is quite familiar to us because of the films such as 12 Monkeys and Time Bandits and the Terminator films, Time Cop even, all sorts of different things, like people travelling back in time. Travelling forward in time it seems to be rarer than going back in time. But in books, it's obviously been a thing that's happened in the narrative for quite a while, and I'm going to cover some classics that go back a long time, and I'm going to talk about some newer ones as well. So 10 recommended time travel books. Okay, so I'm going to start with Ray Bradbury, because Ray Bradbury wrote A Sound of Thunder, and A Sound of Thunder features in the book Golden Apples of the Sun. I think it probably features in a few more now, but I think this was the first appearance that it made after obviously initially appearing in something like Astounding Stories or something. But this was the first collection it was in, and A Sound of Thunder is basically the story that created the butterfly effect, the idea that if you go back in time and change something, then when you go back to the future again, it could be horrifically worse, some small thing you did. And in A Sound of Thunder, this is just an amazing story. Obviously it's a very short story, but just a fantastic idea, and that big twist where this sort of game hunter that thinks he's done nothing wrong went back in time to hunt dinosaurs, and steps on a butterfly, and when he goes back, the future's completely different. So yeah, I haven't really spoiled it because it's very short, so read it anyway because it's an amazing story, and Ray Bradbury's a dude, so read The Golden Apples of the Sun. So I thought it was really good to start with that, because obviously we all know, well, I say we all know, it is quite familiar, the idea of the butterfly effect, and it comes from that story. So it's only right that pretty early on in this list I ought to tackle the classic, the one that really put time travel on the map, and that's the great H.G.Wells and his book The Time Machine. So the thing with The Time Machine as well is quite unusual, because most books go in the past, is he had his character travel into the future, and the first time he goes like 800,000 AD, I think he goes to, and then he goes sort of a million years after that, and he encounters the next form of humanity, like post-human species, and they kind of split them, and humanity is split into two different creatures, and it's very fantastical. It's full of wonder, because that's kind of how H.G. Wells writes. So it's kind of serious, but in a kind of innocent way, and it's kind of the character that's time traveling isn't really that aware of what's around him. He encounters people that have kind of developed a relationship with him that he doesn't really acknowledge, because he's not aware of that. So there's some good characterization in it as well, but all sort of it's framed by a dinner party where he's kind of just showing off his new invention and his sort of high intellect, but then he's shocked when he goes into the future. So yeah, an absolute classic, and definitely one that should be included when you're talking about recommended time travel books. H.G. Wells. So I lent this book out, this one I want to talk about. It's another old classic, Mark Twain, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Hopefully there's a picture of it there. But basically, it was one I had to read for this video. I wanted to do this video, and I thought I should read it. And it's quite odd, because he goes back in time and goes into a different country just by getting knocked on the head. And basically, Mark Twain uses it as an excuse to kind of rip into the old sort of dark ages and their sort of morals and their outlook on life. And he kind of like paints them out as idiots, really. So it's kind of it's got a funny tone to it. I really enjoyed it. But the character in it literally wants to just bring democracy and modernity to King Arthur's court, and he's got this sort of rivalry with Merlin through the whole thing that Merlin's not a part of. He just decides that he thinks that Merlin's a charlatan, so he's going to kind of belittle him. So yeah, it's an interesting read, but it's quite odd. But it's also a little bit patronising about the people that might have lived in those times. Mark Twain's reason for writing it is presumably to celebrate modernity and democracy and all these kind of things and in some ways probably take digs at the Catholic Church, because he seems to be doing that a lot in the book as well. But it is a really good book, and I did like it. But yeah, it's definitely I think he wrote it for political reasons, but soft political reasons, because clearly he's not mocking something modern. He's mocking something that's, millennia ago. So yeah, worth reading though. Okay, we're getting a little bit more modern now, because this was done in 1991, and this is Connie Willis, and the book is the Doomsday Book. It's a SF masterwork, and it does get talked about a lot, and I think it's justified. I think it's a big old book though. It takes a while, and you could argue that, and I wrote this in my good reader's review. I said that you could have snipped 50 pages out of it, because it does drag a little bit in the middle, but that's often the case with books that are over 560 pages sort of thing. So it's a really good book, and one of the things I really like about it is that the character in question, she goes back in time to the time of the Black Death, which is a part of history I'm particularly interested in. So that was really awesome, and basically it puts that character literally in that situation, and she's helpless because she hasn't got any modern science to kind of solve her predicament, and it kind of juxtaposes her situation with the modern day scientists trying to deal with an epidemic that's happening at the time as well. So both things are happening, and you basically see you see this helpless time traveller try and get through it. It's really good, and it's not very funny. Apparently the second book, which I haven't read yet, which I want to, I've got it over here somewhere, the second book, which has got a fantastic title, To Say Nothing of the Dog, it's supposed to be very funny, but this isn't very funny, but it's very interesting, and it did kept me gripped for the whole book, although like I said, it does sag a little bit in the middle. But yeah, Doomsday Book, Connie Willis, really, really good. The next one I'm going to tackle is by Michael Moorcock. So this guy does write quite trippy things sometimes, and most of the time is written in a kind of a straight fantasy, sword and sorcery kind of way. But he has delved a little bit into other areas. And in Behold the Man, you've got a time traveller who, through a time machine that's like an egg, ends up in Jesus's time, and it's kind of it's kind of this character's interactions and adventures in biblical times, and basically he wants to meet Jesus, and lots of Christians were upset by this book because it's not a particularly endearing vision of Joseph or Mary, and particularly Jesus. I won't tell you, in case you want to read it, I won't spoil it by saying what those three characters are like, but it's not very complimentary. And the main character decides to take history by the scruff of the neck and become a huge part of history. So yeah, if you're curious, it is quite an odd book, but it's quite I think it's classic because it's so bold and so potentially offensive, really. But ultimately, it's an interesting take on a man who, the time traveler in question is kind of has got a bit of a messiah complex, but also is a little bit messed up anyway, and kind of finds a purpose in him traveling back in time. So yeah, an interesting one to add to the list, but an odd one. Behold the Man, Michael Moorcock. So if you've seen any of my previous videos, you may have seen the first one I did on 5 science fiction recommendations, where I talked about Claire North's book Touch. I think she's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But when I read Touch, I knew that there was one book that had been talked about a lot more than that everyone seemed to be talking about, which was this one, The First 15 Lives of Harry August. And this has definitely got a huge kind of time travel trope running through it, but not in a kind of a more conventional time travel machine kind of sense. This is basically Harry August is not the only one, but he's one of the people that when he dies, he goes back into his own body again and lives the life again with the knowledge and awareness of what happened for his whole life. So it affects how he lives that life. And obviously in the book he does it 15 times, but on the 12th time a woman comes to see him and tells him that the world will end if he doesn't intervene. Can he solve the riddle of what's going wrong so that he can solve the situation? And basically there's another person like him that is trying to mess everything up. So it's a thriller, but it's also fascinating, and like a lot of her books, it starts with a high concept and sort of runs with it in quite a detailed way. So like everybody else, I couldn't recommend this enough. It's such a brilliant book. It's so well written and it's really gripping, and she got a good way of keeping the tension going and keeping you wanting to know what happens next. So yeah, First 15 Lives of Harry August, an awesome book. So I've read a fair amount of Stephen King books over the years. Really, a big batch of those were 20 odd years ago. But I'll get into reading him again and trying to read some of the ones that I didn't necessarily read that are some of the favourites. But one of the ones I did read was a time travel book. This one, 11/22/63. It's absolutely brilliant. It does get recommended mentions a lot online for all the right reasons. It's quite big. Like the Doomsday Book, it does take a while, and actually similarly I did say I thought it sagged a little bit in the middle, only a little bit. It didn't spoil it. I thought it was just a brilliant book, but I think you do have to kind of push yourself a little bit after when you're on sort of page 550 or whatever. I think there's about 100 pages where you just think, all right, get on with it. But that's because the amount of detail King puts into his books, and it is a fascinating story, really good characterization as you would expect. And it kicks off with this idea that he wants to prevent the assassination of JFK, but it gets much more complicated than that, and it's actually got a really beautiful ending. So I know that a lot of people criticise Stephen King for his endings, but I thought this had a really nice ending. So yeah, absolutely fantastic book, really. I couldn't recommend it enough. And a nice one that for the Stephen King canon, I think, as well, because it's a bit different. So yeah, 11/22/63, excellent book. So one of the strange things seems to be that there's a lot of films that come out that take time travel as a comedic thing. They'll make a humorous film out of the situation, but you don't really get that a lot in books. So it's quite nice you have got that in this series by Jodie Taylor, the Chronicles of St. Mary's, and this is the first book in the series, just one damn thing after another, which is a famous quote about what history is, just one damn thing after another. And all of the titles of the series have got some sort of irreverent comment on the past, and the whole kind of nature of the book, the whole tone of the book is very light-hearted, and it's kind of if you like, panic-stricken characters jumping from one situation to another by their wits, with not a lot of planning and a lot of improvisation. It's basically Max, who she's the main character. She enrolls in this first book. She enrolls in a university as a historian, and in this particular university, they go back in time to write their accurate histories, and they try and not affect the historical events, but they try and bring something back that wouldn't be missed. So something that's been buried or something like that, so it doesn't affect the timeline. But clearly, what happens is sometimes something happens that does affect the timeline, and it all gets a little bit hectic. And Max is the first person narrator through the whole thing, so she's got quite a good sense of humour. So I do like these books. I've read 7 now. There's 11 for the whole series, and I do think they are like a lot of fun to read. And they the way that Jodie Taylor writes is very, very easy. You just like fly through it, and you realise that a lot's happened, but you just sort of rattle along because it was such a fun read. So that's the Chronicles of St Mary's, and this particular first book is just one damn thing after another. So Ted Chiang has, well, I only ever see 2 books on the shelves. As far as I know, these are the 2 books he's released, 2 short story collections. And this one I've read. I haven't read the other one, but I bought it, so I want to read it. But this literally blew me away. This book is unbelievable. Really, I would say it's probably the deepest book I've ever read. The one that really gets you thinking and properly explores what it means to be human, what it means to have a memory, what it means to value your relationships and the time you have with the people you love, and all sorts of things like that. All of these stories combined just make all of these different issues come to life in a really profound way. I was knocked for 6 by how profound the book was. The first book, which is called The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate is a time travel story, and it's a brilliant time travel story, essentially saying you can't change time in any kind of dramatic way, but you can learn from it. And the main character kind of gets a different perspective on things when he's trying to affect time and affect his past, and his relationship with his wife. So I won't say anything more because it kind of develops as it's going along, and it just it beautifully wraps itself around the concept and around each new development in the plot has to be kind of solved, or he learns from it, and all that kind of stuff. So it's beautifully written, but the whole book is it really is just such an amazing, powerful book. But the first story is specifically about time travel. So Exhalation, Ted Chiang, amazing. So I've spoken before about Blake Crouch because his book Dark Matter is amazing, and knocked me for 6 when I read it. But the follow-up to that is called Recursion, and that's just as good, arguably. It's fantastic, and it's basically another kind of unconventional take on a time travel kind of situation. So it starts off with a policeman investigating this strange phenomena where people are being sent mad because they've got someone else's memories, and there's a neuroscientist that's also involved in trying to figure out what's happening, called Helena. She becomes the main character, and but it kind of flips between their 2 stories, and she becomes an integral part of the development of some technology that effectively is like time travel, and the person that employs her, lots of things come to light, and she realises that she's kind of enabling something quite horrific, so she has to do something about it, and then it kind of like kicks into kind of thriller gear, and it's just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, and you read his books and you just think people should make a film out of all of them. It's very cinematic, but ultimately a really good thriller with a time travel element that, like the Claire North book, is a little bit unconventional. But couldn't recommend that enough either. Recursion by Blake Crouch. So, All of these books are really good books, but there's tons of time travel books out there. So if you do have any examples that you think I should read if I had mentioned them, they may be things I've bought that I'm going to read, I don't know. But I'd like to know some more that are out there, some more that you'd recommend. And if you do like these videos, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks a lot.